Hi folks, Kim Schofield in for the Crafters Workshop today. First, I apologize for my voice. I have been fighting some kind of crazy cold thing for a couple of days, so forgive me for that. But today's project is going to feature this canvas, which I'm calling Let Your Light Shine Canvas. And it's using just the one stencil. Actually, I absolutely love this new stencil from the Crafters Workshop. And the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to create a nighttime or a background. You can use this kind of a nighttime sky or a galaxy type of background. So I first learned this technique from Kristina Werner, some of her videos, and I will link to those in the description below. She uses watercolors to do her backgrounds, and for some reason I find I don't have as much success with it. I really like using the distress paints, maybe because the daubers kind of create this little cloud type of formation, a little bit easier for me than watercolors, but she does some beautiful work with that as well. So you can see when I first started the video, I had a number of distress paints, and these are, I've got a blue and a purple, a green and a yellow, and a pink, which really look really nice together. And I'm making a big hot mess on my canvas. This is a 8x10 canvas board. And, you just can't mess this up. I'm really just squishing the paint around using the dauber, even on the green color. The top doesn't really work anymore, so I'm just using a brush to put some color on. I'm overlapping a little bit. I did use a little bit of water to kind of cut back on not the brush marks, but kind of the streakiness of the Seedless Preserves paint when I first put it down. But that was the only color I did that on. The rest of them, I just kind of blobbed the color on there. Used a brush if I needed it to do a little bit of blending, but a pretty dry brush, not a lot of water. Because if you have too much water, the distress paints are going to react. It's going to really thin them out. And I want to keep a pretty opaque coverage to the paint. So you can see I'm spraying a little bit. That's really more to try to get some little marks in the paint. But in the end, that didn't really matter too much because that didn't show up too much. Now, if you were to use watercolors, that would actually have a greater effect. You might have that reaction with the little spots, the way that distress ink reacts. But the paint is not quite the same. I was trying to get a little bit of blending. I wasn't super successful with that, but it ended up working out just fine in the end. You really don't, doing this technique, you don't want to have a ton of blending. You really want to have these unique blocks of color in the background. And so I'm just trying to blend those a little bit just to soften up those edges. And then I'll completely dry that with my heat tool. So now you're going to freak out because I'm going to cover a big portion of this with black distress paint. And in hindsight, I kind of wish I covered a little bit less than I did with the black, but you'll see in the end where I wanted to highlight some of the yellow color. That's why I needed a little bit more of the black so I wouldn't lose the yellow where the lights were shining. But I am just putting down some of the paint, and I started kind of with a heavy hand. And then I found that if I kind of kept working on that paint, not squeezing the bottle at all, just depressing it so some of the paint comes out. But once that dauber top would get a little bit drier with the paint, I kind of found I liked that coverage more. So I went a little heavy-handed in one area, and then I would use that excess of paint to cover more areas all around on the canvas. And so I'm really just going around. This is personal preference, of course, on how much you would cover this. Starting off lighter is better. Start with a drier dauber top if you're using this technique. If you're using a brush, start with a little bit drier brush because you can always add more black, but it's hard to take it away. And with the distress paints, once they dry, they are permanent. So they're not like a distress ink that will still continue to react with water. So you do want to be careful that you know, are only putting this black where you want it. And so I'm patting a little bit of the black back. You can move this paint while it's still wet, but once it's dry, you're all done. And then I did cover the sides of the canvas with black as well. So that would be all around on the edges also, so I don't have that white edge showing. And so now you see some of those colors peeking through. I'm making sure everything is dry, and I'm actually using some Crafters Workshop gesso. It's just in a different container so I can pour it. And I'm watering this gesso way down, and this is when the magic happens, really. This is when it starts to look like a night sky or a galaxy background. And I am just using my brush to add a whole bunch of white little splotty dotties all over the background. And of course, again, you can do as few stars as you like or as many as you like. Um, so I kind of went a little crazy. Sometimes when you get the little teeny tiny spots, I love it. And then I'm going to completely dry that. So now here's my stencil. And I want to have a light shining out through these little jars, these little jar lights. And so I'm just using the stencil to figure out where the middle section or where the light would be coming from the jars. And then I'm using my another distress paint to kind of, you know, make that section a little bit larger. And now I'm going to dry because that's still looking a little too transparent for me. I really want this to be bright. And so again, start out with less and then add more because it's always easier to add more. And so I kind of, you know, started building up the layers a little bit at a time. And then once I had enough of the color down where it was really covering the black, so you weren't still seeing through that, then I used the dauber portion, you know, that little sponge dauber on the top of the paint to kind of soften it out a little bit and make the edges a little soft. And so now I'm just checking to make sure, okay, do I, you know, do I need any more of the yellow paint? Is it all in the right spot? Do I want to expand it a little bit? So now this is where I'm kind of drying that off a little bit and just kind of making it so it's not this very, you know, the circle's not very clean around the edges, but it kind of softens that edge a little bit so it looks more like light that's shining out through the stencil. So now I've cleaned off my stencil, everything is dry, and I am using my light and fluffy modeling paste to go over the entire stencil. And I'm picking up that paste with the back of my palette knife, and then you smooth it on almost like you would ice a cake. It's very similar, and actually the light and fluffy is almost like frosting. It's just as delicious, you know, the effects, and a lot fewer calories, so it's not bad. I love this stuff. I feel like I use this on absolutely every project that I create. Everything is made better with modeling paste, I think. And I really am partial to the light and fluffy. I find it to be a little bit more pliable once it's dry. It doesn't matter on canvas, but when you're working on paper, the heavier stuff tends to be more, you really can't bend the page at all once it's completely dry. So I really like, I like the light and fluffy. It's a little bit easier for your pages to bend. And now here comes the magic. Oh, I love it. Look at that. It makes me very happy. Because this was an idea I had in my head and it worked. So if you get paste that goes anywhere you don't want it to go, I'm just using the tip of my palette knife to remove some of that paste. Some of my edges got a little fuzzy, and then this spot, I don't know, got a little blob under there, but it's really easy to remove. And then you can heat set this if you want, or just set it aside to dry. So then I had this great idea to fill all of my lights with glossy accents so that when it's dry, you know, you'll have that little shine there that you can see and it'll look like glass. So sometimes it might look a little bit cloudy on the other lights where I've already applied the glossy accents, but that will dry to be completely clear. And I am going over the embossing paste. I'm not dragging my tip. I'm just kind of dabbing the tip up and down to get the glossy accents to come out. And I can just look in the light to make sure I have all of those sections covered. And this is almost the end of our project. This was a super quick and easy project. So now my glossy accents are drying. You can see that great shine that you get. And I just use some really old letter stickers that are in my stash and added my sentiment there. So that is about it for me today. Oh, I did attach that all of my letters with the matte medium. So that is it. Thank you so much for hanging in for today's project. Visit my blog listed here or the Crafters Workshop blog. Thanks so much. Happy crafting.